Earliest memory of Kol Ami is coming here in 1986 when I was coming to interview and to accept a position as an assistant rabbi. And it was the first time I came here, and I borrowed a telephone in the front office. I called David, my husband, and I said, "David, it's beautiful."
My earliest memory, quite honestly, was November 23rd, 1963. We had just moved to White Plains, and that was the day John Kennedy was shot. And we had already planned to come to services that Friday night, and we had a babysitter hired, and we came, and again, there were 1,000 people here. It was filled because people didn't know what to do.
My earliest memory of Kol Ami was actually before I ever set foot in Kol Ami. The first night Charlie and I met in college, there was a big event across the entire campus, and of course that was our very first day there. We didn't know anybody, we didn't know our way around, and so you sort of grab onto anybody that you might have remotely, remembered their name from earlier in that day, and you try to run around with them so that you can find your way back and not be totally on your own. And I remember the person that I ran around with told me a little bit about himself. He played the trumpet and he blew the shofar at his temple, which is how I figured out that that was Charlie.
Yeah, it was a good line.
For me, it was I had never belonged to any kind of place that requires you to do this kind of, getting so involved in all of these things. And as we just opened the doors and saw people coming in, it was just something that was lovely.
It would be Rabbi Davis, and he was still the rabbi. And I remember the services were almost all in English. There was no Hebrew, which I found off-putting. And the thing I remember the most was when we would come for high holidays, and Rabbi Schwartz would get up there, especially in the county center, and he would bless the congregation. Here you had this little man giving the Kohen's blessing, and you felt so blessed.
Almost God was down there, coming down to bless you.
Which is your favorite child? It's, there are so many. I couldn't tell you a best memory. Probably one from each of 50 different categories, but.
My husband and I got married 5 years ago. My husband is not Jewish, and he's been as much a part of the community as anybody else since we brought him into the community. And I remember Tom did our wedding, and Shira did our Ufruf here. And I remember during the ceremony, Shira saying, "Okay, now bring the Torah down." And I just instinctually was like, "Okay." And she's like, "No, let's have Matt do it." And that was such a embracing our family.
I think for me, it was a bunch of different really special times. Of course, when Charlie and Sarah were bar and bat mitzvah, that was very special. But I also think I came to Kol Ami, my parents were a mixed marriage. So when I came to Kol Ami, it was Shira really who educated me, the adult program, and converted me. And so one of my memories is Shira dunking me in a lake. So that was a great memory.
I remember when we first moved back to White Plains after 20 years. It was our first Rosh Hashanah back. I now had kids, and the night before Rosh Hashanah, we had been reading the first chapter of Genesis to the boys, and my then 8-year-old Arthur asked me, if God is all-powerful, why did God need to rest on the seventh day? And I said, I don't know, that's a good question for the rabbi. So at services the next day, we pigeonholed Shira, who had a million things on her mind and no preparation for this question. And he asked her, and she said, God wasn't resting. God was sitting back and admiring the beauty of the world. So it was very special to see her connecting with my kids the way she had with me.
One of my favorite memories is probably when I first started to make friends with one of my friends, Chase, who was in my first grade class in Kol Ami, and he's also in my second grade class.
The other really strong memory I have as well was Cantor Smallriver. We used to go up to his study, which used to be on the 3rd floor, and it was a big trek. We would for your Friday night grade level, and so we'd only go up there like the few Sundays before our service, but it was like a big deal. It was almost like his office was a secret.
That's an easy one. My relationship with my daughter, because very often I understand that being the child of a clergy person can be very difficult and alienating. And sometimes, you know, the synagogue you resent the synagogue because it's the place that kept taking daddy away. My daughter has always loved this place and always come on her terms and been involved. And even now, well out of college, she loves this community. She loves the family that she has. Her closest circle of friends are from this place. So I would say I don't know that I can say I fostered it. I got out of its way, out of the way of that relationship. And I'm very grateful for it. And that's been my favorite relationship here.
I have a nice relationship with Cantor Danny because back a couple years ago, he took us me and my dad to a baseball game, and it was like really nice because we were going through a hard time. It was just nice to like be there, like at the game with like Cantor Danny and Dad.
Every time we go to services, I always try to sit as close as I can to the musicians because we play. I play piano and trumpet. He plays piano and flute, and he plays piano and guitar. So it's really interesting to kind of see them play it, but like professionally, and like see like. I sit on another side of the synagogue. I still hear the music, but it's kind of cooler to see it, like how it all comes together, like see the pieces of it.
The music there is just really great. It's so touching, and sometimes it's like really upbeat and you feel good. Sometimes it's so touching, like you just like sit there and listen to it, and then just like it's almost like some music is like making like reflect on like stuff that has happened before, and just makes you think, or just makes you feel like you want to dance.
And I adore our new rabbi. I think he's fantastic. And he comes up and kisses me and he says, "Hi, Barbara." And I thought, he remembers my name? He's fantastic. I met him before he came here once, and he remembered me. I adore him, and I feel so blessed that we're lucky to have him.
I had a very special, forever, lifetime spiritual connection with Rabbi Davis, who was the rabbi growing up here for me, and he is deeply in my soul and in my heart, and I think about all the things that I learned from him all the time. Shira and Tom were a big part of our family's life for many years. They were here throughout all the years of our raising our children.
For many years, Debbie Friedman, who was the songwriter of the Reform movement, and really the voice of the Reform movement, for many years we did monthly healing services together, and between Kol Ami and Westchester Reform Temple, and 1 month here and 1 month there, and Rabbi Rick Jacobs and I led the services with Debbie Friedman, and for many years. And I was away on vacation when I heard that she had suddenly died, and it was January, I don't remember what year, As it turned out, it was the week of Shabbat Shirah, the Shabbat of Song. And I was back at Kol Ami the following Friday night, and we all gathered, of course, for services. I had been in shock, and with the news of her death, just shock, no tears. And when we started services Friday night and began to sing her music, the experience was so overwhelming for me of feeling the strength of the congregation, the strength of her spirit, the strength of everybody's spirit and what we had experienced together. That was beyond comforting.
So for me, I think one of the most important times was 9/11. After 9/11, we felt so isolated and so afraid. And I remember sitting at the services and feeling this great feeling of comfort.
I was going to say, just as Caleb said, I mean, it was wonderful, and I was going through my health crisis, that the clergy kept on checking in, not just on me, but on Rebecca, and asking how Caleb was, through the whole thing.
Her oldest son, my husband's oldest brother, died. I think one of the great sources of comfort was establishing the garden.
Yes, we started a little garden outside of the new temple.
Of the chapel.
Of the chapel of the woods. And I love the chapel in the woods. And we started singing there in memory of Dick.
When my grandfather died when I was 11, I remember coming home from school, and Tom, who was new-ish, was like sitting on our couch wearing like jeans and sneakers, and our friends were like, "That's the rabbi?" I'm like, "Yeah, he's just like a guy, and he's here always, like for everything."
I always say Kol Ami brings me comfort just by being here. It's a touchstone for me, a place that I come to in my happy days and my sad days and my everydays. It gives me a purpose and meaning to my life that I would not otherwise have without Kol Ami. So it's a 24/7, 365 days a year source of comfort.
The biggest change I've seen, I want to say that Kol Ami was always warm and kind. When I first came here, it was very respectable and conservative, small C conservative, staid, wasn't a lot happening, proper, it was very proper. And so the biggest change I've seen is one of spirit, that Kol Ami is adventurous and daring and open to the spirit and the spiritual.
I loved being here as a kid, and I loved religious school, and I loved going to Friday night services. And there were times I would ask my parents if they weren't planning to come to services. They would drop me off. I would come very regularly as a teenager, coming, to services. So I would say the worship, and in a lot of different ways. I remember being at the county center for high holidays, where the entire congregation just filling the county center. I remember where we used to sit, in the balcony. And then I would just say also, sort of the music has changed, the style, the amount of Hebrew. I love how much Hebrew, that we do as part of worship, and I'm here every Friday night, every Saturday morning to be involved in the worship. But to me, that is a big change, and also a very, I would say, a positive change. I love worship here at Kol Ami.
I think the biggest change has been services. When I first joined, we were using the Gates of Prayer book, which was not gender neutral. It was a beautiful prayer book with lots of poetry, and there were 5 different types of services. It was a little bit more formal. And then Rabbi Shira came up with this idea of wanting to have a Kabbalat Shabbat service. For a while, we actually had two services. We had one at 6:15, one at 8:15. 6:15 started to grow and grow and grow. 8:15 started to dwindle and dwindle and dwindle. 6:15 had dancing and no sermon. And then I was president at the time, and it became apparent that didn't make any sense to have two services. So I brought a group of people together, those who go to 6:15, those who went to 8:15, and said, what can we create that's new?
I'll never forget the first temple annual meeting that we attended, which is 35 plus years ago. The big topic of controversy was, should the synagogue permit the rabbi to wear a kippah on the bima? And things have changed a lot since then. And I would say services in general have, employed more Hebrew and also a lot more music and a more sort of broad variety of music in the time that we've been here. And synagogue attendance has also gone up dramatically from the early years when we were members of the synagogue.
What have I learned from you over the years? A lot. What I've always been so appreciative of is, on one hand, you know the tradition so well and are very respectful of the tradition. And I think because of that knowledge base, you therefore have the right to question it and challenge it and tweak it. And I've loved that combination and you see it in our services and in our liturgy, where there was something ancient that you found, twisted it a bit and gave it new purpose and meaning, and that's a wonderful gift. You set a beautiful precedent here, which helped me so much with my daughter, is making sure that this rabbinate, as busy and demanding as it could be, was always family friendly, that family came first, which I think just really enhances the congregation. It's a good, healthy thing all the way around, but you helped me establish that in my own life. I'm very appreciative of that.
That makes me so happy, really happy. And I'll take that one. I also learned that you can't, in your liturgy and your prayers, talk about a certain world and not make that world happen. So if you believe that the world is faithful, the world is joyous, the world is supportive, spiritual, loving, then you have to make it that way, that the service has to be that way. And then, you believe it. I would also add that trust is really big, and creating a community where people could trust us, where people could trust that their souls would be held, and that the adventure would be worth taking, and that they would be safe and loved. That was pretty great too. And I always felt you had my back, so not that we needed that a lot, but there was never this kind of adversarial feeling. I felt that, the congregant threw a tomato, you would have been, you would have grabbed it before it hit my face. But sure. In real ways, I think we had each other's backs, and that's comforting and important and powerful. You think we can be straightened out at this point? Yeah. You couldn't have done this 20 years ago? Happy 100th.